Introduction to Economic Development. My name is Neil Schnei. I'll be your professor for the semester. And I just want to go over a couple housekeeping things before we jump into the actual course material. So I passed out a syllabus. It has changed a bit from the one that was on the website, so use this as your primary reference point for the semester. Now, presumably you're all here to figure out, why is it that countries grow rich and why is it that some countries stay poor? That is the overwhelming focus of this course. But in order to get there, we're going to have to spend a little bit of time studying the actual theories of growth. Meaning, what are the frameworks that economists have used to foment growth in the quote-unquote third world? And why have some of these strategies succeeded and why have some of these strategies failed? So that's the overwhelming majority of the course. Now, I'm Neil Schnei. I've been a TA at Zeiss for about 4 years. I'm a PhD candidate here, and I've been learning and reading and writing about economic development for most of my Zeiss career. We have a teaching assistant for this course. His name is Evan Hume. He's not here today, but his contact information is available on the syllabus, and he will be available for any and all questions in addition to anything you might have for me. So what I want to do is go over the syllabus, make sure there are no questions on just logistics of the course, and then we'll jump right into it. Sound good? All right. So first of all, this course requires a little bit of math. Yeah?
Sorry, so is there another kind of syllabus from?
Yeah, sure. That looks like your colleague's going to help you out. So this course requires a bit of math. Okay, it doesn't require multivariate calculus, but a basic facility with numbers, graphs, algebra is essential. So what I said on the syllabus, has everybody seen this document or is aware of it? It's called the Zeiss Math Companion. Okay, it's available on eReserves. And it basically is just a pre-calculus course in a nutshell. Okay, so this is essential in order to do the best you possibly can in this course. So download the document, it's on eRes, and just leaf through it. You're probably aware already of over 90% of the material in it, but this is one of the critical building blocks of the course, okay? So you can take a look at this during the break if you have any questions on that. All right? Now,
does that differ much from the DVDs that were sent around from the American?
No, it's kind of a distillation of the DVDs. So in case if you don't feel like watching every last minute of them, all right?
I have one technical question.
Yeah.
The eReserves password now is get, only get. There is no number 11 next to it.
That's correct.
Well, because I tried this afternoon and I couldn't open it, but then obviously I have the other one.
The other password, yeah. Yeah, it's gap, yeah. So yeah, just when there are actual math concepts we have to go over, and I'll be very explicit about what's required for the problem sets for your midterm, but by and large, if it's in the Math Companion, it's good to know. Okay. As I said, we also have a teaching assistant named Evan Hume. Now, this course makes use of two primary reading materials. The first is your standard economics and development textbook. This does not vary. This is mostly commoditized information set in here, so it has all the basics. Over 80% of the course readings are in this book. Has anybody had any problems finding it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble? No?
I actually bought the 5th edition thinking I was getting a great deal. Is there
There's probably not that much of a difference. What I would do is sit down with one of your colleagues' books, take half an hour, just skim and make sure that you're not missing any major sections. All right? But yeah, you should be fine. So that's the main textbook. And then I've also chosen William Easterly's The Elusive Quest for Growth. Have any of you guys heard of him? Yeah, okay, so presumably some of you have jobs in development. He is one of the heavyweight titans of the field. This particular book it's witty, it's quite wry, and it's very accessible. And it's used as a complement for the primary textbook. He's a veteran of international development. He has rather pessimistic views of our ability to improve living standards in the developing world, and so it's an important part of your repertoire in this class. Okay? And as I said, there are many additional readings which are also available on eReserve. Now, you're all probably wondering how you're going to be graded in this course. So the exams and assignments are as follows. Okay? You have two big tests. You have a midterm, you're going to have a final. Okay, the final in midterm have some multiple choice questions, there'll be some short answer, and then some essay questions. Okay? We'll give you more on those learning exercises as the time approaches, but by and large, that's the format of them. Okay? They'll be partially quantitative, but nothing that you won't be able to do without a calculator. Okay? And we also have a problem set, which we'll assign and give to you next Tuesday, which will help prepare you for the midterm. Okay? And your teaching assistant will help you in that regard. And you'll find more about that assignment later. And then the final kind of piece of this of the puzzle is a policy brief, where we have you write a short memorandum for Timothy Geithner, some development expert on a topic of your choice, and we'll give you more information on that as follows. Now, there is no specific class participation grade as such, but class participation will be noted, and it's really kind of when your grade is let's say an 89.6, your final average comes out to that. It's used mostly as a tiebreaker. So if you come to class, you're prepared, you ask good questions. It'll help you kind of on the borderline cases. Okay. The examination policy, we sound a little more strict than we are. We understand that you're busy, you have work, that type of thing. But if you need to have a makeup for the midterm or the final, please let me know this week, Thursday at the latest, because it's just really difficult to accommodate everybody's minute preferences. And if there's a medical reason or something, that's fine, but it needs to be documented. Okay? All right. Also, I'll be making use of Blackboard. Have you all tried to access Blackboard? Okay, it's just a reminder. It's at blackboard.jhu.edu, and you can just use your JED login information, and the course will be there. Okay? And I'll periodically upload articles and that type of thing onto the Blackboard site. So check it. A lot of communication takes place there. So just give it a look, a couple minutes a day. All right? Great. Now, the overall trajectory of the course is as follows. Prior to the first midterm, prior to your midterm, it's going to be largely theory-based. Okay? So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about education in developing countries or financial crises in developing countries. We're going to give you kind of a crash course in the theories of economic growth, basically from Robert Solow to the present. And that's largely the first half of the course. You can think of that as the theory section of the course. So we talk about different metrics of analyzing economic growth. That takes place largely on Thursday. And then we'll jump into the Solow growth model, theories of exogenous growth in Lecture 3. And then jump into endogenous growth in Lecture 4. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about institutions, states in Lecture 5. And then finally we'll end it with inequality and poverty, and that'll bring you to your first midterm. Okay? Thereafter, we're going to jump into population, education, health, saving, investment, productivity growth, how these things fit into economic development. And then we jump to one of my favorite subjects, Lecture 10, Financial Crises in Developing Countries, where we assign Carmen Reinhardt and Kenneth Rogoff's This Time is Different, 8 Centuries of Financial Folly. Have you guys heard of this book? Have any of you read it? Yeah, you have one? You like it?
Yeah.
A lot?
Yeah, it's
yeah, it's excellent. I mean, this is kind of the one large end study of financial crisis that exists, and it's a good one to have in your repertoire. Then in Lecture 11, we'll talk about foreign aid, a highly controversial topic. And then Lecture 12, we'll end up talking about institutions, thus leading into your final exam. Okay? I will hold office hours every Tuesday and every Thursday from 5 to 5:50, and it's a 5:16. That's 1 floor above here. So you don't need to make an appointment, just show up, my door will be open. If you have any specific issue, questions, comments, concerns, feel free to swing by then. Also, I understand many of you probably hold full-time jobs and it might be difficult for you to come at 5, so send me an email. We can certainly meet after class or at some other time, even on the weekends. Just send me an email and we can confirm. My email address is on the board at nshanai@gmail.com. Okay, so office hours by appointment that way. All right. So, before we go any further, I would like to get to know you all a little bit better and make sure that my course roster is fully updated. So, if we could each just take a couple seconds and introduce yourself, talk about why you're here and maybe what you do as a career. And we can start with you, Wynn, in the back, and then work our way forward.
My name is Wynn Monroe. I'm a MA student at Zeiss, and I'm studying American foreign policy, but kind of using all my electives on economics. I'm working part-time at the World Bank during the summer and taking some classes in the evening.
Okay, great. What group of the World Bank do you work with?
Financial and private sector development.
Great. Hopefully you can bring a lot to bear to our discussions. Thanks, Wynn. All right. Yes, you in the back.
My name's Kirsten Adams. I work for the United States Catholic Bishops. I work in the Office of our Relationship with the Islamic Community.
Mm-hmm.
I've spent most of my life doing things somehow within that milieu. I spent a lot of time doing education in South America,
Right.
running educational institutions in South America and Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
I'm finishing a PhD in philosophical ethics, and I'm taking this summer program as kind of a complement to
Great. Very cool. Where are you in your PhD?
I'm doing it through Regina Apostolorum in Rome.
Okay.
So I have like 3 classes left that they're letting me do distance while I'm here in my
Okay.
dissertation.
Very cool. Well, great to have you here. Now, are you formally registered? I don't have you on my roster.
I registered today.
Okay.
So
Okay,
I think
new
I'll be on
addition.
your
Okay.
roster for Thursday.
Just making sure.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yes, please.
My name is Lincoln Phillips. I work with the U.S. Coast Guard. I'm actually in the part-time master's program across the street, but I'm doing the certificate in international development as a complement to that program.
Great.
And at some point in the near future, I hope to become more involved in working with developing country interests
Cool.
in some capacity.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Lincoln.
My name is Rich McManus. I'm a tax lawyer. I do specialize in mergers and acquisitions tax, and I'm thinking about kind of a mid-career switch or a late career switch. And I've always been interested in development, so I'm going to pursue a certificate in international development just to get an idea of the issues,
Very cool.
opportunities.
Great. Well, it's great to make your acquaintance. Please.
Hi, my name is Rahul Natapajaiva. I actually come from a developing country and we're in Uzbekistan.
Great.
I'm across the street doing part-time MBA at Johns Hopkins. This is the elective course for me because I work at the World Bank.
Okay.
And I support the South Asia department responsible for India.
Great. Cool. Thank you. Great to meet you.
Hi, my name is Veronica Pescario. I am Spanish, and I'm trying to become a diplomat. So, for me, it's very important to know about economics and about development and cooperation.
Sure. Oh, great. Thank you.
My name is Sarah Brandon. I will be the one random out of the group, I guess. Give a little shit. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton, and as the company moves in a more international field, this is a stepping stone for me to slowly get towards a master's.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So you plan on going to graduate school, further MA programs?
Right now I'm working on the certificate. Let's
Okay.
one step at a time.
Go from there? Okay. Great. Sequencing is very important as well.
See how much the company's going to pay for.
Yeah. Very cool. Great. Hi.
Hi, I'm Adelhaida Hativovic. I'm from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I've been living here for almost 10 years now, and I work for World Bank for the Executive Director's Office.
Cool.
And I'm doing MBA at Carey Business School, Johns Hopkins, but this is my elective, so obviously I have interest in development.
Very nice. Great to have you here. Hi.
Yeah. Good evening, DCU's second year, Zeiss, African Studies concentration.
Great to meet you, Disa.
I'm John Sipperly. I'm working for USAID projects, and I just returned from Kosovo. 4 years.
Great.
I'm John Boyer. I'm in the MIPP program. This is my first class in that endeavor. And I work at a trade association. We do lobbying on free trade agreements. And,
Very nice.
a lot of discussion on the role of trade and economic development, which is quite interesting.
Great. Oh, we'll have plenty of that in this course. So that's good to have you here, John. And best of luck in your science career. Hi.
My name is Jürgen Keitel. I am German. I work for Airbus out in Virginia, doing customer relations, customer support, supporting all the basically airlines from South to North America, and material and logistics support, and just wanted to do something different. So I thought, living in DC, why not look into downtown DC and see what happens with economics.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Jürgen. It's great to have you here. Hi.
Hi, I'm Maya Daniels. I'm welcoming you to the MIPP. I'm one class away, or 2 classes away from finishing up.
Great.
Like this lady, I'm at Marriott International. I work full-time in business development. Used to do investment banking at Citigroup. I think you have a Citigroup background or something.
What group are you in?
I was in their technology sector. This was like 10 years ago. So it was
very nice.
Israel high tech. But you know, just enjoying Zeiss, and like I said, almost done, and I think this is the only class that fit in my schedule, frankly, but should be good.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Joseph Riddle. I work for a business news publishing company, and I'm the publisher of our education group. This fall, we're launching a blog, a journal on education policy.
Cool.
Which is my main interest.
Very nice. Well, great. Great to have you all here. Look forward to getting to know you all better over the course of the semester. So, what I'm going to do, so this is the nature of every class. I will try to be as structured as possible. I will give you an outline before we begin, and I will do my best to signpost throughout that discussion. The lectures will loosely follow the readings, so it's best to kind of do those beforehand. Now, obviously today, being the first class, many of you probably either didn't have access to the preliminary readings or just got your textbooks or whatever. But going forward, try to do the readings before class, because then you'll get the most out of lectures. So, why study growth and development? I think this is a particularly interesting subject now. We look at the nature of globalization in the 21st century and the impact of labor and capital flows on economic growth. This is arguably the challenge of the 21st century. How is it that so much of the world can live in high per capita income in rich countries with access to healthcare, education, electricity, and yet so much of the world still remains mired in poverty? So that's the ultimate question for this class. I think the most important thing in studying international development is to approach the subject with a modicum of intellectual humility. If there's one thing you take from this course, it's please be very, very cautious when using linear projections of any kind. There have been many, many, many books written about Japan is #1 by Ezra Vogel in the 1980s, where the next big thing appeared in development, the next big idea seems to have been written, and we seem to have arrived at all the answers. The truth is, we don't know where economic growth comes from. We have lots of good ideas. We think it takes capital accumulation. We think there might be a cultural dimension to it. We assume that stronger governments are better at assuring property rights, and that property rights might relate to economic growth. We have general ideas about the ingredients for economic growth, but we don't know very much about the proportions of those ingredients, or whether or not those ingredients are merely coincidental. Maybe there's something else that we need to be looking for. And so this, unlike, let's say, a particle physics class, there are no hard and fast truths that we've arrived at. And this is largely descriptive science because of it. Okay. Now, another major goal of this course is to train you all to think like an economist. Now, when we say that, when we study international development, it is a subject matter that is inherently prone to our own emotional whims. When we look at poverty, when we look at health outcomes, it just tugs at your own humanity when you read about some of these stories. What the challenge is for development experts and for people who study the field is to approach it as an empiricist, to understand that there is this human emotional component, but that the development institution as a whole can only succeed if we approach it in a systematic way. I think this is an important point that often gets lost in the cacophony of various literatures herein. Okay. So those are my imparting words of wisdom in starting this course. Now, what I want to do before our break is take a little bit of time to discuss the preliminary readings that we assign that are available on Blackboard. Okay? Now, the first two come from the Commission on Growth and Development. It's about 300 pages or so, plus statistical appendices. So these you have to read in full. That's a joke. You do not have to read these in full, but they are very important resources and reference points for over the course of this class. Okay? So use these particularly when you're writing your essay or studying for tests. Use them as a complement. Okay? Now, what are they? Well, in short, these documents have distilled basically 40 years of economic development orthodoxy into what the global financial institutions believe are the key ingredients of economic growth. They talk about the role that states play in establishing property rights. They talk about the role of exports in creating the conditions of rising per capita income growth. They also talk about the role that global financial institutions play in creating the conditions for economic growth. Now, what are some of those financial institutions? Sure, we have the World Bank, we have the IMF, but in this current incantation of capitalism, many private actors determine development outcomes. Think large mutual funds choosing whether or not to invest in Thailand in 1997, or individual members of individual hedge fund managers deciding whether or not to speculate against emerging market debt. In other words, there are many, many, many actors whose actions lay the groundwork of economic development. And it's helpful to be aware of them. These reports go over them. Now, the big question of humanity, and what I mean by that is the large question that futurists and many economic development theorists are considering right now is the notion of economic growth in the very, very long run. Now, I don't mean necessarily over the next 30 years. Now, countries that are growing very rapidly today probably have a very good shot of achieving higher middle income status. But the issue is the existence of two possible futures. Now, this logistic curve, income, traces income per capita, Y over L. This is the terminology we're going to use, okay? Y equals income, L equals number of people. Would argue that we have witnessed very, very, very fast income per capita growth over the past 150 years. And yet, we might be approaching some type of plateau. What are some reasons why per capita income growth might just absolutely level off? Population. So maybe there's a population constraint that prevents us from continuing growth. What else? Yep. Resources. Resource constraint, right? This is a major concern today with oil resurging over $100 a barrel. Perhaps there is just a natural tipping point where we can't continue growing because of our material limitations. Resources is another one of those. What else?
I was going to sort of do a microcosm of that and suggest the current financial environment, difficulty in getting financing.
Okay, so some type of financial institutional constraint. I think that's very fair. Now, did anybody read the prologue of Easterly? There's one big element of this that he said actively he's not going to talk about. Yes?
I would say political instability, or he's talking about his like great-great-great-grandfather running all over the place, fighting and making not so nice with his neighbors. So.
Sure. So I guess you could argue about man's natural propensity to descend into violence. That might be some type of level of.
Oh, sorry, the environment. So.
Yeah. So the environment's a very big portion of this. Right? So just environmental degradation, which arguably is a byproduct of economic growth, might sow the seeds of this per capita income growth leveling off. Okay? We aren't going to spend much time in this class talking about each of these individual constraints, but it's helpful in the first lecture to be aware of them. Okay? Anytime you're having a discussion about economic growth, these are essential components of it. And finally, we juxtapose the S-curve with this kind of monotonically increasing up and to the right income per capita over time. Okay? Who might believe this? Anybody read any early economists? Somebody like Adam Smith would arguably be a big believer in this, right? Remember, you guys know who he is, the Invisible Hand of Competition, talked about how as long as the government gives a good rule of law, provides statehood, etc., income can grow over time. Okay? What I want you to be aware of is the inherent tension between these two visions of the future. The leftmost vision is a very zero-sum world. Okay? Where one country's economic growth necessarily detracts from another. And this is positive sum. Okay? Two different potential visions. Now, it's important to consider economic growth historically. So, taken from the statistical appendix of the report, you take one of this around, please. And whoever ends up with the extras, just kind of keep them in a neat pile. Okay, good. Now, while this is passing around, it's important to note how new a phenomenon economic growth really is. Okay? Economic growth really only started to take place over the past 500 years, and really only accelerated. Economic growth really only accelerated over the past 250 years. The living standards of your average 15th century agrarian worker, in terms of life expectancy, in terms of number of calories consumed per day, were largely the same as those of his fellow compatriots during Roman times. Okay, so economic growth was virtually non-existent for large swaths of human history. It's a relatively new phenomenon. That's the upshot of this graph. On the back side of this, in figure 1.4, they plot global GDP since 1960. Now, here too, it's important to remember how utterly prosperous the second half of the 20th century was, by and large. Okay, it witnessed the East Asian economic miracle, the development of two very large populous countries, particularly in the early part of the 21st century, in India and China. Okay? Not to mention the extreme wealth of places like the United States, of Western Europe, Japan, and also some of these newer players like the Republic of Korea. Okay? So this kind of gives you a regional breakdown of where a lot of the economic growth of the past 40 years has come from. Look into these, okay? In the actual report, it talks about the source of this income growth. This is an important data point for you, okay? Now, this particular report, the post-crisis growth in developing countries. How many of you guys know the intricacies of the global financial crisis? Okay, well, this is a great source. You do? Are you a homeowner?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. So this is a particularly good source of just kind of how did we get into the hell of 2008 and the effect of the global financial crisis on emerging markets, so-called less developed countries. Okay, it's a good resource in case if you don't know the nuts and bolts of the global financial crisis. Okay, now that's the first preliminary. The second preliminary we assigned was Robert Skidelsky's piece. You guys heard of him? Yeah, you have? Who is he?
Author of the Old Master. He did the whole of the Weber. I haven't finished it, but I like it.
Yeah.
I have to still finish it. It's a hard read for me. I'm not an economist.
Oh, that's okay. We'll
quite interesting.
try to help you with it. So he is John Maynard Keynes' biographer. Okay, he's a member of the House of Lords. He came and spoke at Zeiss last semester. He's very eloquent, very British. He is quite a man of letters, quite a Renaissance man in the modern day. Now, This particular piece is great because it gives you a good story arc for the entire course. Okay? So I strongly encourage you to read it. Now, why is that? Well, in this particular piece, Skidelsky discusses two traditions of approaching economic growth. The first of rote mathematical economics, and he reviews a book by Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Lucas. And he also discusses political sociology, a la Greenfeld. So, in this book review, Skidelsky asks, why did the West develop? Why is it that we had economic growth at levels therefore unforeseen, particularly in the West, over the past 300 years? And he uses these two authors to illuminate and potentially answer this question. So Greenfeld's argument takes the whole notion of economic growth and puts it on its head. And she claims that political developments were responsible for economic growth. Okay, political developments. That particular development that she talked about was the force of nationalism. Economic growth took place because of the ideology of nationalism. Nationalism in particular allowed states to become cohesive units. It allowed states to alter individuals' incentives, to defer individual gain for group collective benefits, which in turn created a virtuous cycle of economic growth. That's Greenfeld's argument. Nationalism is a source of economic growth. And there's a certain resonance to this argument. I mean, look at it today. Okay, look at the countries that are the most wealthy. You have the United States. American nationalism is very, very strong here. Countries like Japan, which is particularly in the latter half of the 19th century and into the early part of the 20th century, had a very strong nationalist ideology, a certain subjugation of economic activity to the behavior of the state that led to economic growth. And also today, China, arguably one of the most nationalist countries in the world, and also, coincidentally, one of the fastest growing. Yet Skidelsky points to certain limits to this line of analysis. He shows how Greenfeld didn't necessarily tie nationalism to the changing of individual incentives of those within a society. Meaning, how does nationalism change the incentives of a given entrepreneur who probably just wants to create a business for his own personal gain? She doesn't flesh out that link. And he also talks about how many deeply nationalistic societies and countries tend not to grow. So there's just as many data points on the contrary. Think of Nasser's Egypt in the latter half of the 20th century as an example of this. Or the Soviet Union, particularly in the Russian Federation after the 1990s. What's important from this particular piece is to understand that there are many debates about the sources of economic development, and many people believe that economic development is a purely political process. And that's the point of Greenfeld's book. Now, Skidelsky also talks about Robert Lucas's discussion of endogenous growth theory. And it's very interesting to read this piece by Skidelsky because he tends to poke fun at economists. He talks about how they write a language that is inaccessible to the common man with equations and fancy-looking characters, etc. Now, that said, he distills Lucas's argument, which is of course the theory of endogenous growth, into the idea that economic growth takes place because of the accumulation of knowledge. The accumulation of knowledge in the form of human capital is the reason why economic growth takes place. Now, why might this make sense? Well, what did Britain have in the late 18th and early 19th century? Anybody? I'm sorry? I can't. Can you speak up?
Engineers to build ships and then.
They have good engineers to build things? Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yes.
What? Yes.
Industrialization.
Sure.
They always had a very strong middle class that was perhaps had more opportunities for education.
Sure, so that's part of it. Now, the question is, did the economic growth create the middle class?
Right.
Did the middle class create economic growth? So there's certain endogeneity to that. But yeah, that's absolutely one part of it. Maybe there's the development of a leisure or knowledge class of landed aristocracy that was better off, that pursued the otherworldly pursuits of knowledge creation. That's an argument, right? How about today? Where have the biggest inventions in the United States come from? Universities, large research universities like Johns Hopkins University, the first research university in America, right? These provide incubators of knowledge so individuals can come to them, share in the positive network effects of their fellow researchers, and can in turn create innovation, which leads to economic growth, right? There's a certain feel-good quality to the Lucas paradigm, because if we accept Lucas's argument that knowledge is the source of economic growth, then that creates an enormous scope for the state and for the government to actually create that economic growth. Think of the role that public universities might play in creating knowledge. Think of various job training or patent subsidizing entities. Things like DARPA in the United States or MITI in Japan. And yet, Skidelsky also finds many problems with Lucas's argument. His first is that the mathematical deductive formulation of Lucas's theory tends to ignore the real-life limitations of mathematically derived economic maxims. Now, that's a fancy way of saying what? Well, we exist in the real world, and I could assume that Wynne is going to pursue his very narrowly defined self-interest in certain circumstances. Yet he might behave altruistically, thus invalidating some of the conclusions of my model. Moreover, Skidelsky talks about how Lucas didn't spend much time exploring the role of policy in creating economic growth. If we accept that knowledge is a particular form, missing ingredient of economic growth, then we need to spend more time exploring where does knowledge come from in the first place, instead of merely grasping at straws and potential areas for it. The Skidelsky piece is particularly good because this is the type of analysis we hope you do over the course of this class. To take from various sources and paint a vignette of different situations of economic growth and economic development. Okay. Are there any questions on Skidelsky's piece? Highly recommended. Read it. It'll take you 10 minutes, and he's very good. Now, the final piece that we assigned, preliminarily, is the 2008 Introduction to the World Development Indicators put out by the World Bank. Document that looks like this. The reason why we assign this is that at the end of this particular piece, they talk about the Millennium Development Goals. Who's heard of that? Millennium Development Goals. Pretty much everybody, right? I'm sorry?
The people that work at the World Bank.
People who work at the World Bank, they probably heard everything right. Do you take one and pass it on, please? So I'll pass around the final 2 pages of this report right now, so we can go over that. Now, the Millennium Development Goals were created during the 2000 UN Millennium Summit, and they really outlined basically every broad category, broad metric of economic development that the global development community could think of. Now, we're going to spend a lot of time in this course talking about economic growth, rising per capita income. And yet, economic development is a far broader concept than just growth. Okay? What's included in this? Well, we have education is a major portion of this. We have health outcomes, such as life expectancy, access to various utilities, electricity, clean water, gender rights. And so the Millennium Development Goals are this crystallization of the idea that we can have a very broad and comprehensive view of economic development. So for instance, they claim, the 8R, they claim they want to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. This makes sense. Without being able to eat, it's very difficult to be productive and in turn live in a productive and economically growing society. Achieving universal and primary education. Promoting gender equality and empowering women. Reducing child mortality. Easterly gives you a statistic in his first chapter that in the developed world, about 4 out of every 1,000 births, 4 out of every 1,000 children die within the first year of being born. In Pakistan, what's the number you guys think?
150, 200.
150 to 200. It's come down a little bit over the past couple of years, but it's still about 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 die within the first year of birth. Right? And you can imagine the mental and physical toll this might take on society. And related to that, then, is the notion of improving maternal health. Furthermore, the Millennium Development Goals argue that we should combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other preventable diseases. Because an unhealthy society is one that tends not to grow very quickly. It's very easy to get stuck in a health trap wherein such large swaths of the population continue to fight disease that they are unable to get out of this trap. Finally, they talked about ensuring environmental sustainability and developing a global partnership for development. Now, these sound like fairly lofty goals, and as we'll see over the course of this class, there are many, many different potential hiccups to achieving these particular goals. But keep them in mind, because they really undergird many of the policy decisions made by global financial institutions and global development institutions over the past 10 years. Okay? So, I urge you, given that, to spend some time looking at the preliminary readings, take this weekend perhaps to skim through the large reports, and certainly read the Skidelsky piece, because many of the themes touched on that will recur time and time again. Okay? Now, before jumping into the second half of the lecture, I figure we can take a 5-minute break. If you guys have any specific questions, I'll be here to answer them. So when we come back, I want to make it 6:50. And then we can start with the rest of the lecture. All right? Great. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
What was on Blackboard?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no page numbers on here.
Yeah, this is it.
Okay.
Yeah, read it. It'll be quick.
I will. No.
Good. Hey, what's up? You need syllabus? There you go. Don't worry about it. Oh yeah. I passed out 2 other things too. Okay. Actually, no, just the syllabus and. Oh yeah, and then Millennium Development Goals.
Yeah, no, I forget that.
Okay, there's extra value.
Okay, anyways.
What's the easiest way to get the books?
There's just like 6 of you in here.
I know, but this is.
Yeah, Amazon would be a good bet. You can use your .edu email address and order it off Amazon Prime, and they'll deliver it in 2 days. So you should have a .edu email address now that you're such
There's
students.
some
So yeah.
budget and something maybe that I won't really use to do something, because I'm not from a science philosophy. I know economics from the
So you in the Coast Guard, or you work?
Oh, with the Coast Guard. I've never been out there.
I was in the Navy many moons ago. I was in jail.
I really hope it.
Coast Guard, I assume, has just grown and grown over the years.
To a certain extent it has, but the current environment funding is tied. strain on everything, just about right.
Where is your office?
Headquarters across from Fort McNair. It's a job, I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I know. Stay in age, that's important.
We've had 4 or 5 people retire, transfer out. Different positions, go do somewhere else. So. Better to have that than have ribs.
I left the government in 1990. Now I'm going to go back. Although, you know, I don't know what.
We went to a practice law in the private sector.
I need tax law now, and I don't want to leave for at least several years. That's why this program is great. It's so flexible.
So it's good that we did in 1990 because I felt like the profession the last few years, people get law school and there's no jobs for anybody.
Right. Yeah, it's tough.
They have huge debt, they can't pay them enough.
I can believe the people who hire the other places, it's just can't imagine. It's so competitive coming out of law school. But, you know, law schools continue to bring in droves of people every year.
There was an article in Wall Street Journal that said a lot of some colleges in the last 10 or 15 years have actually started law schools to try to get them money.
They're very profitable.
The kids keep their jobs and graduate.
Yeah. Excuse me? Yeah. Yeah, I said you're interested in it. This is my first class for it. I have to have a meeting with the advisor, talk about my plan of action, I guess.
If you want.
They didn't
Are
see.
you doing development or international stuff?
Development.
Well, the other foundation classes, international systems.
Yeah.
I took that last summer.
So this is your second?
Yeah, but I'm in the master's program across the street.
Oh, you are?
In security studies.
Oh, great.
So I'm doing this, something like that. I'm in the economics across the street. So I actually got some connections in political economy, finance.
But my sister has been
My
to
wife finance classes in
Kazakhstan.
size.
So you're getting your master's in
Yeah, I
science?
am
No, I'm master's in grad school of science.
So,
Spain.
Yes.
I've been to
Program. First in science.
Ah, you go.
Master's in
Did you like?
but it's part of John's house.
Do you sit with the women has friends?
But I went to the studio with this kind of.
Ah, I am also
when I did
Which one?
I took international systems for the certificate.
Between
That's
in the
quite
middle.
eye-opening.
We are friends.
Because I went to South Africa.
Yeah, we're doing that next summer probably.
So you have country friends?
Yes.
This is a lot of red, I opened the syllabus. There's gonna be a lot of work.
Last summer, we did 50 course readings.
Yes.
3 or 4 readings for the first
Yes,
class.
having thought.
And that was really well into the semester. The final exam was fewer weeks, so it was only like 15 readings maybe. Plus a paper.
None of those.
So, next Thursday, next session.
Every school is like looking at it.
Well, I've been across the street, I was doing it slow, so I've been doing this since 2008. So I've been sort of using this last year, I sort of got 2 courses this semester. But I had 2 courses this semester. I missed 2 courses this semester.
You're working full time, right?
So far, I have all days, for the first meeting.
It's pretty good. Must be doing something like that.
pass out a couple more handouts here. Take one of these, pass it up. These and pass one. Yeah, a lot of them. Just the first class, though. Yeah. Now, the plan for the rest of the class is to, I'll probably lecture for another probably 50 minutes to an hour with time for questions therein. And then the final 10 minutes, I have a brief survey, stuff like your email address, preferred email address, why you're taking this class. Just another tool for me to get to know you better. So yeah, just make sure you complete that before you leave for the day. Okay. All right. So what I want to do now is just jump right into the first lecture. These various sections 3, sections 4, 5, and sections 3, 4, and 5 pertain directly to chapter 1 of the Perkins book. So loosely corresponds to that. Section 6 corresponds to the Lamp-Pritchett article. What's the big idea? Third generation of policies for economic growth. This is available on eRes, so definitely take a look at this. Everybody see this? Okay. And then finally, we'll end with a brief discussion of Easterly's elusive quest. All right? So, this notion of there being different experiences and patterns of development, I will argue that development heterogeneity and development variance has increased over the past 50 years. Okay? Meaning that the experience of less developed countries have diverged quite rapidly among less developed countries over the past 50 years. And I think that the 3 vignettes that open up the first chapter of your textbook really highlight the diversity of experience in developing countries. The life of the average Malaysian is far different than the life of the average person living in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay? Now, in some countries, conditions have rapidly improved. Places like Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, Brazil, China, India have experienced very quickly rising living standards, fast growth, falling infant mortality, etc. And yet there is a large portion of the world that remains mired in poverty, that seems kind of stuck in this trap. So this class is as much about those countries as it is about those countries that are rapidly growing. Okay, and it's important to keep that in mind. There is a fantastic and accessible book that I'll recommend to you all. This is not required, although I highly recommend it. Collier, I see some of you nodding. The Bottom Billion. How many of you have read it? Yeah? Okay. So this particular book is great because he talks about the 4 traps that less developed countries fall into. Having bad neighbors, being stuck in a violence trap, etc. That keep countries, that prevent them from jumping into the, let's say the state of Malaysia or one of these fast-growing countries. Okay? A highly accessible book, and it's a fantastic complement to this course. So put it on your Amazon wish list. You can get it for very cheaply on half.com or something. But it talks about this. Okay? So that's the first major thing. So we need to be acutely aware of the different experiences that developing countries have nowadays. Now, development and globalization are highly related economic concepts. Okay? Now, why is that? Well, we live in a Westphalian state system, certainly. And national governments have quite a bit of control, domestic autonomy, over their territory. But states, particularly after the Second World War, have been living in a world of ever more openness and ever more channels of interaction vis-a-vis one another. Okay? And there are many dramatic changes taking place in the developing world that directly pertain to this notion of cross-border sensitivity. think changing political systems or authoritarian transitions. It's very difficult for us to understand, think of a counterfactual in which the Soviet Union didn't fall without any implications on behalf of the United States foreign policy. It's very difficult for us today to think of the existence of an Arab Spring without some semblance of, be it social media or various other things that literally crossed borders, okay? So that's one other major dramatic change that's taking place today that's implicated by globalization. I'd argue that health, spread of disease, etc. is also kind of a pan-global concept. Germs can cross borders quite easily, and so what happens in country A can very easily happen in country B. And this phenomenon isn't just limited of low-income country to low-income country, but problems that take place in low-income countries can oftentimes reverberate back and hurt and harm high-income countries, as we see in the SARS epidemic, that type of thing. A major pedestal of this age of globalization is the free flow of goods and services across borders. And it would be a shame if I didn't discuss this. Right? Over the past 50 years, the global trading system has become increasingly liberalized, and goods have passed across borders very quickly. Moreover, many countries have harnessed this phenomenon to grow vis-a-vis export-led growth. Okay? And so countries' access to global export markets is a very important variable in determining their level of per capita income. It's hard to imagine a developing China without their access to Western consumers. And that's just the side of the real economy, of goods and services. There's also the financial economy of global capital flows, which have increased in prominence over the past 40 years, and particularly after the breakdown of the Bretton Woods system. We have increased intensity of global capital flows in the form of FDI and also portfolio flows. So who can explain the difference between these two? Yeah, Wayne?
FDI is when companies come in and invest a lot and build things, especially when they invest like large shares in a company and actively own it, while portfolio investment is more when they just take a small piece and they don't really have any interaction with the company, they just want some of the returns on their investment.
Sure, that's absolutely it. So the best way to think of FDI versus portfolio flows, FDI is more brick and mortar investing from country A to country B. Okay, so if you guys graduate from Zeiss, you raise $10 million from a bunch of high net worth individuals here, you move to China, you build a factory and employ 16 Chinese people in it, that's FDI. Okay? Brick and mortar investing. This is also known as cold capital flows. Okay? Think of the analogy, it's cold, so it moves at a glacial pace. It's slow to go in, but as a result, it's slow to go out. And secondly, there's portfolio flows. Now, portfolio flows, also known as hot capital, pertain to the buying of financial assets from one country to another. Think of buying stocks and bonds in less developed countries. So if Win raises that same $10 million and then takes it and buys shares of publicly listed countries in South Korea, that's portfolio investment. Do you guys see the difference? It's very easy. Any one of you today, with enough capital of course, can open up an Ameritrade account, fund it overnight, and then tomorrow morning be part owner of any company in the world that's publicly listed, that's available to the global financial institutions. It's quick to go in, and it can also be potentially quick to go out. We'll talk about that in a second. You have a question?
I have a question about the 90s and the Soviet Union, when, actually the collapse of the Soviet Union, when foreign companies arrival was considered as a foreign direct investment, and yet they wanted the ownership in the companies, at least 51%. That was clearly viewed as a foreign direct investment, and yet you just described it as a portfolio flow. What would be the difference?
So in the case of, let's say, the early years of the Russian Federation, when foreign companies came in and they owned 51%, and they had actual ownership of various newly privatized. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. Newly privatized industries.
Formerly state enterprises that.
Yeah. So that, I mean, it depends how they actually invest in it, right? Because if they were just to buy shares of one of these newly spun off privatized companies, that would be considered portfolio flow. FDI would be perhaps buying the entire company, not just assets backed by cash flows of that company, and actually using the company as a vehicle to build factories and have more brick and mortar investment. It really, I mean, it's these are the broad strokes, but it really depends on the actual natures of the transactions. I need a little more information on that before I just speculate wildly which bucket it fell into. Okay, but that's how you would decide the difference. Good question. Now, portfolio flows are very important because they are very quick to come into countries. They can also be very quick to leave countries. Okay? When portfolio flow leaves a country, and when a lot of that takes place at once, that's known as capital flow. Can anybody think of any country that experienced capital flight, perhaps in the 1990s or even 2000s?
Most countries in Southeast Asia.
Very good. So capital flight, you could argue, was the key generator of the Asian financial crisis. Okay? For whatever reason, investors' confidence in these capital flight. For whatever reason,